we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks you all for being here and spending your lunch hour. I hope you have some lunch with you. And I will try not to eat my lunch while we're talking. So if you just joined us, we are not going to do introductions today. I think we all know each other, but if you could put in the chat who you are, where you sit, and how many people you supervise, and that way folks kind of have an idea about the number of employees that this presentation will provide some information about today. So this project came out of a DECA lead conversation, and a lot of the content for this presentation was provided by Trenton Garber as we were talking about how do we take some next steps in our leadership work and not just training and experimenting with leadership, but actually supervising the activity of leadership in our organization. Thanks to Krista Machado for being our producer so that this runs smoothly today. And Michelle and Kelly put the bulk of this information together, and so I appreciate their work on this. What we'll be doing today in the next hour is I'm going to be providing an overview of some content. Michelle will be facilitating the team through a couple of videos with some questions, and then we're going to try to spend about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes with Kelly in some small breakout rooms to begin applying some of this information. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Krista, can you go to the next slide, please? So why is this important to us? Why is supervising the act of leadership important? We wanted to go through relatively quickly some of the foundational level information that we have been working with since our time with the Kansas Leadership Center. Many of you have been through LEAD and done your Leadership Edge, so this will be a simple refresher. For those of you who have not engaged in either of those programs, this information will be sent to you afterwards so that you can have it, because we're going to go through it relatively quickly. So this is important to us because we value encouraging leadership by challenging existing conditions and finding innovative ways to grow and learn. We've all had that opportunity more than we ever thought we would over the past 6 months. And our leadership principles is that it's an activity, it's not a position. We are all seen as leaders because of the seats we have, but we're not leaders because we sit in a seat. It's because of the activity we engage in. Anyone can lead anytime, anywhere. Anybody within DECA, our volunteers, our foster families, can lead initiative or can lead a group. It starts with us, and we must engage others. So leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum. Leadership must be clear, and as we all know, leadership can be very risky. Next one, please, Krista. So very quickly, we wanted to show you the core competencies in the KLC model and that we have embraced as an organization. Diagnosing the situation is a leadership competency. We explore interpretations. We try to figure out the difference between technical and adaptive in an issue. We test multiple interpretations and we take the temperature or some of the skills in that competency. We spend a lot of time managing self, and I can tell you this is the one where I have spent a lot of time recently, knowing my strengths, vulnerabilities, and triggers, choosing among some of the competing values that might be weighing in on a situation, experimenting beyond our comfort zone, and for all of us, I think taking care of ourselves right now periodically can be a challenge. We energize others as a leadership competency. We work across factions, so we identify who else might be engaged in this conversation. Anytime we make change, whether that's a really great change or a difficult change, there is loss associated to that. And so we work really hard to speak to that loss and acknowledge it. And then we create a trustworthy process, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And then the final competency is intervening skillfully. We make conscious choices and we raise the heat. Sometimes we do that intentionally and sometimes it happens. We give the work back to other people so that we are not holding the work ourselves. And we act experimentally, which again, we'll talk about here in just a second. Okay, Krista. So how do we identify acts of leadership? I mean, I don't think, unless our staff have been through LEAD or your Leadership Edge, that they are coming to you and saying, I am now going to take an act of leadership. So how do we identify that, and how do we call it out when it's happening? So maybe our teams are asking questions about the status quo. Why are we doing it this way? Is there something else that might work better? How is it affecting somebody? So they're challenging what we've always done. Our teams might be engaging with other people on an issue. So how is it that the work that I do might be impacting what's happening in finance or within the child welfare group? We're exploring a process that might be happening outside of our team. We're engaging others to try to develop a collective purpose. Maybe you're seeing more emails back and forth from your team to somebody in another department or others on your team. So your staff is talking about or implementing experiments. And again, if they haven't been engaged in LEAD or your leadership edge, or they're not hearing all of us talking about experiments, it may not be that they're saying, you know what, I'm going to try an experiment on this. Maybe they're saying, I'm trying to find a solution to something, and here's what I'm going to try. Next, please, Krista. Maybe your staff is trying to identify if there's any value gained by leading a change versus the risk it might cause. So maybe they're coming to you and saying, hey, you know, does it matter if I try this? What do you think would happen if I tried this? Or would you care if I made an attempt at this? Or maybe your staff is making some conscious choices to engage in a challenge in different ways that might actually mean raising the heat with you or with their team. Maybe they're taking on something new that's outside of their comfort zone without you asking them to do it. Or maybe they're asking for some additional feedback, that they've tried something and they want to hear from you what you think about that. Next one, please, Krista. So as you're seeing all of this happening with your team and you're calling it out to your team, for us to be, as supervisors, to be able to encourage leadership, we have to be able to build a trustworthy environment. One of the things that I am not a Dr. Phil watcher. I used to be. I will acknowledge that I am a recovering Dr. Phil watcher. And one of the things Dr. Phil said, he said too, he would say, the problem is you, and someone is trying to work through their issue. Or he might say, how's that working for you right now? So one of the things we as supervisors are challenged to do when we are helping to build a trustworthy process is that recognizing that we may or may not have a direct role in our staff engaging in leadership. Next one, please, Krista. So how do we build a trustworthy environment? As supervisors, how do we do that? We get comfortable answering many why questions. Why are we doing it this way? Why? For those of us who are parents, you remember when we had toddlers? Not saying our staff are toddlers by any means, but we spent a lot of time answering why, because folks are curious. So building that skill again to be comfortable responding to those questions. Being open with our teams about having conversations that might challenge our values and loyalties and beliefs. Maybe we need to be looking at something that we're involved in and maybe looking at that in a different way. Approaching our staff with curiosity and demonstrating interest. What are y'all doing? How can I be helpful? Tell me more about that. Asking open-ended questions, and when there's something to celebrate, celebrating with them what they've discovered. Creating space for our staff to learn and explore. One of the things we're doing in behavioral health right now is putting together a team that's going to really focus on client engagement and retention. And so one of the things that we as supervisors in that team, we're going to have to create, create space for those team members to be able to do that work. We encourage our staff to work transparently and inclusively. We're not keeping secrets. We're asking them to engage other people in this conversation. Helping staff develop experiments, encouraging them to identify something that they want to try and making a really intentional choice about that intervention. Helping them work across factions, one of our leadership competencies. Who else in the organization or outside of the organization, or maybe the people we serve, want to be a part of this process? Be accepting and helpful. And redefining failure. You know, the key thing about an experiment is they don't always work. And sometimes folks are afraid to try something because they think we're going to be frustrated or something's going to be happen to them if they fail. We have all tried things in our personal and professional life, and failure is part of the deal. We redefine failure by saying it's not something bad, it's something we learn from. And the other piece of leadership in our seats is protection, direction, and order. That is the authority piece of where we sit. So being able to provide that boundary from which we can engage in experiments. We're not going to violate accreditation. We're not going to violate licensing standards or ethical standards. So creating that bucket in which folks can experiment. Next one, please. So as we were looking at putting this training together, I spent quite a bit of time out on the Mind Tools site, which if you're not familiar with Mind Tools, they have some really great information. And so I found this quote: "Good leadership takes strength of character and a firm commitment from us to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason." That means for us as supervisors, we do what we say when we say we're going to do it. And in the volume of work that is our environment right now, sometimes this gets to be challenging. But if our teams can't trust us, we'll probably never lead them to greatness. Next one, please, Krista. So there are pitfalls, even in a trustworthy environment. Sometimes we need to acknowledge that risk is going to happen. We need to acknowledge that we're raising the heat and that sometimes that's going to be uncomfortable. So we can ask questions to ensure that we and our team are on the same page. Again, clarifying interpretations, looking at multiple interpretations about the same issue. Acknowledging to them that tension's going to exist. It might exist between our relationship with them, their colleagues, or another department. Discussing our work priorities. We have a lot going on, all of us, and as folks are engaging in leadership and experiments, helping them prioritize the work that still needs to go on and the time that they need to do that experiment. And a reminder to know our own strengths, vulnerabilities, and triggers. What is it about staff experimenting with something that might rub us the wrong way? And really analyzing, is that about us or is that about the experiment? Making sure staff communicate and work openly and transparently, working across those factions. We know we get crossways with each other when I'm doing something that might impact somebody else in the organization, and we haven't talked about that. Talking about the importance of that challenge process staying within our organization and within policy, and then being sure that everyone's clear about the potential risk of what we're doing. Next one, please. So we've identified that our team is engaged in acts of leadership. We've created a trustworthy process for them to do that. And we have figured out the protection, direction, and order. We have figured out the bucket within which they can experiment. So the next step is experimentation. And using that word as it's intended is not just a buzzword, but it's an intentional intervention. So as we're talking with staff about experiments, we're figuring out how to help them do that. Just to reinforce, experiments are really to determine what works and sometimes what doesn't work. The best learning is when we really screw up on something and we know that that's not what we want to do or how we might do something differently. Next one, Krista. So here are some of the parameters of an experiment, and I would encourage you all to look at the KLC materials. We have a form that we use oftentimes that talks about how to do an experiment. It has a clear purpose about testing a specific intervention. So remember when we were in school, we have a hypothesis that we're supposed to be testing. It's the same concept. It's very specific about who, what, where, when, why, and how long. An experiment is time limited. It has objectives to identify what we want to accomplish. It takes into consideration risk and a plan for mitigating situations where very large risks might be present. So part of the planning process is what are those things that might come up and how do we mitigate those risks? Again, it often fails. It doesn't happen in secret. I'm not going to start an experiment and not tell Lori that I'm doing an experiment. And I'm also going to tell my colleagues that I'm doing this experiment. Back to protection, direction, and order. An experiment doesn't violate agency policy or program policy. We're not going to do an experiment that puts clients at risk, puts other staff at risk. And it doesn't test, challenge, or undermine an individual. I'm not going to do an experiment to prove one of my staff wrong. I'm not going to do an experiment that puts the agency in a difficult position. This video shows how supervisor might actually stifle an active.
What are some not good supervisor acts here? Want to hear from 2 to 3 voices.
He was like, "That's wrong. The answer is mine."
Very good. Thank you, Esther. What else?
Not being available.
Say more about that, Teresa.
We're all busy, so I'm busy doing my thing, so I can't be available to you. So.
Okay. Very good. How about one more observation?
Generated the solution instead of letting the team have a voice in it.
Very good.
So as a supervisor, change starts with you, and you want both you and your employee to be successful. So it's your responsibility to create a culture where challenging the status quo is encouraged. You want your employees to think outside the box, but that doesn't always mean that something needs to be changed. But you definitely want to encourage forward thinking. By doing that, you're building trust and a safe environment for your staff to have a growth mindset. So I know you guys watched the video already, which was a pretty funny video, especially if you're an Office fan. I think I heard somebody say, mm-hmm.
Sorry, I love The Office.
It's okay. So let's hope that you guys are never in a real situation like that in the workplace. And you guys have already talked about some things that you could have done differently, I think. Yes, Kelly? Okay, thank you. So just a few things that I was going to add were lower the heat, because the emotions were really running high there. And you guys may have already said some of these. I'm sorry I missed that. Engage in meaningful conversations, ask for different perspectives, ask open-ended questions, get your employees thinking. And you want to show staff that you care about their ideas. You want to find out what the purpose is of this issue or idea. What's the reason behind it, and make sure that the employee has a purpose when they come to you with a new idea or suggestion. Next slide, please. And can you play that video for me, please?
I want my life to be about more than a job. I want to give something back. On some days, that's just making a meeting more productive. Other days, that's trying to change the world.
You cannot exercise leadership without purpose. Leadership is about believing in something bigger than yourself. If you don't have a purpose that you believe in, that you're trying to help rally people around, why would you do any of the things we've been talking about? Why would you take the risk of failing, of experimenting and failing, the risks involved with leadership? You wouldn't do it.
I think when you're exercising leadership, one of the desired outcomes for me is to develop the habit of trying new things, generating multiple experiments that might lead to my making progress, or to my organization making progress on what it is we care about, what is driving us, what our purpose is.
We have to remember, we're talking about adaptive challenges. We're not talking about technical problems. So what's next? We got to try things. If anybody tries to tell you that they have a solution to your adaptive challenge, they're just making it up. Making progress involves experimenting.
We choose the word experiment purposefully because it's about having a hypothesis, an idea, and needing to learn something based on a purpose you have. You want to achieve something, you say, hey, this might work. You give it a try and you learn.
And they don't have to be big experiments. It could be something as simple as asking a provocative question, having a courageous conversation with someone that you might be at odds with, naming the elephant in the room.
We experiment not to hope that we find a solution necessarily. We experiment to learn.
An experiment means having a purpose, having a thought about what might help you make some progress towards that goal, giving it a try, getting on the balcony, saying, hey, did it work? What worked? What didn't work? And then trying something again. So it's an experimental approach to leadership. That's what we're all about.
All this matters because we need more people exercising more leadership in our companies, in our communities. It's not just for the select few. We've got to create stronger organizations. We need to create stronger communities. I believe in the power of people exercising leadership. I know more people can do it. And if we're going to make progress on the things that matter most to us, we've got to have more people taking the risks involved with leading.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, purpose helps put things in perspective. Purpose keeps our focus on what's important. Purpose helps guide us and motivate us. What are some things that you all found meaningful from that video? Would anybody be willing to share your thoughts or feelings? Would anybody be willing to talk about the importance of purpose to you? Feel free to unmute and go.
This is John Flicker. One of the things, I recently read this book called Start with the Why. It's one of our things I'm always reading leadership books, and it really talks about this whole concept of being able to have a purpose, why are we doing these things, and not just getting lost in all the tasks that we have to do. It's more about moving away from the task, but more of that taking ownership of that. And I think if our staff, yes, they got to do certain tasks, but if by getting them to understand why they're doing those things and how that impacts what their goals are themselves, then I think that would show better outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. Purpose shows us what's important and why we're working towards that purpose. Definitely. Thank you, John. Anybody else? Mike, you want to share?
Me, Mike? Am I the only Mike on the call? I'll be happy to share what I was thinking.
You're Mike. You, Mike. Yes.
I thought maybe there was another Mike, but and I was just trying to get a screenshot of everybody on the call is what I was doing. I keep thinking of the balcony when it talks about the balcony, and I don't know if this makes sense, but I found that sometimes you need to get up on the balcony and look, and I found that then even when you're in the balcony, you're only able to see so much. And so sometimes you need to go even further up in the balcony to be able to see the whole picture. And
yeah.
Yeah, and by backing up, it's allowed, or I guess going higher in the balcony, it allows me to, what I've found recently is it's helped me look at the big picture. It's included more of, with all the changes going on, it's helped me kind of see everything going on instead of just like one particular area.
Yeah, so being on the balcony helps you look at what you've done or where you are, and decide how to move forward or back if you need to, right?
Right.
It helps you, it could even redefine your focus or redirect your focus. So yeah, that's great, Mike. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share? I promise I won't call anybody out like I did Mike.
That's
Michelle,
fine.
this is Lori, and you were talking about purpose. I think
Yeah.
for me, leadership is an activity, but without purpose, it's an activity that's not aimed at any sort of progress. So I think purpose is the fuel for the projection going forward. And that I think is key, is understanding what the purpose is for any experiment and how it fits into what you're trying to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Mike. I was just going to add that without purpose, there is no path for forward thinking or forward growth. There is no improvement. It's exactly what Lori just said. Thank you, guys. Next slide, please. Okay, fun activity. We've just received a truckload of ping pong balls, but all the balls are defective. They're all cut in half. All sales are final and we cannot return them. What do we do? Think about that for a few seconds. Should we throw them away? Should we just throw that money down the drain? Or can we find ways to use them? Going to ask for volunteers again. Anybody have any ideas or suggestions or thoughts?
I would
Art
use
project.
this. Nope. What did you say, Chrissy?
An art project. Make a wall mural, stick them up there, and make something fancy.
Packing peanuts.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was thinking, packing peanuts.
Packing peanuts. Oh, that's a good one.
I recommend utilizing them as a representation of the kids in the foster care system.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I say try an experiment of gluing a set together and see if they still work.
That's fun. That'd be a fun game, huh? Okay, next slide, please. Thank you guys for sharing. Okay, I want to add, I think I know pretty much everyone here. I want to add that I am not a supervisor, which most of you know, and I have absolutely no authority. Most of you are supervisors, and most of you have supervisors. I want you to think about how it would feel if your supervisor just shut you down when you came to them with an idea or suggestion. I want you to feel, or I want you to think about how that would make you feel. And I want you to think about what your supervisor could do for you to make you feel valued, valid, encouraged, and to help you be successful. And on this slide, we have a few things, a few suggestions for you as a supervisor. Encourage divergent thinking, explore other options, other ideas, include more individuals for perspective. Sorry, I was just reading the chat. I got distracted, Lori. Thank you. Create accountability for experiments. Create goals. Discuss progress. Normalize failure. Failure is okay if we're learning from our mistakes and using the failure to motivate us to stay on track or to hold to purpose or to redirect. Don't use historical practice to rely on successful outcomes. Test new ways. Just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean it's the absolute best way. Encourage your staff to explore the issue, to find several different theories, and then experiment and learn from those experiments. And last, be vulnerable. Be comfortable with not having all the answers. Be comfortable with not always liking the ideas that people come to you with or suggestions. Know how to redirect. Be open to asking for help and making your own mistakes. Those are things that me and my position would make me feel safe in expressing my opinion, or going to my supervisor with suggestions or ideas. And I think from my perspective, which a lot of you have employees under you, by doing these things, you're going to encourage your employee to be a leader, to step up. So with that, I am going to apologize for the technical difficulties one more time and hand it over to Kelly.
All right, thank you. So Michelle mentioned vulnerability. Here we go. Krista, next slide. We're going to go into some breakout rooms. And we know that, you know, as we exercise our own leadership and we learn about our strengths, you guys are all in the positions that you're in because you're super awesome at things that you've done in your life and have gotten you to the place that you are. However, because you are in the place that you're at, you know that you kind of like things a certain way. So what I'd like you to do in your breakout rooms is relax a little bit and share some vulnerabilities that you have that could be impacted as you think about this idea of expanding this leadership idea with your staff. Okay, so what are some vulnerabilities that you have that could be impacted as you expand on the idea of leadership with your staff? And then when we come back, I'd like someone to share. So we're going to go in there for 5 minutes. Krista, let's take them away. Okay, which group was the most vulnerable? Who thinks you had the most vulnerable group? We're so good at that, right? Let me hear from breakout group 1. What was some vulnerability that came up?
That group had Hannah, Jamie, Lori, and Rachel.
So we talked about control. Sometimes letting go of the control to allow that to happen can be difficult, as well as just the general changes to our routine and not liking, you know, change being difficult. And then what if it creates a bigger problem, like the experiment, like this is the way things are, it is an issue, but when we try this something new, is it going to make things worse?
Oh.
Also the fear of being incompetent and not doing things well.
So that if things break because of the experiment, then the leader, i.e. the person in charge, the authority person, is in trouble for that shakeup?
Well, or even that if the experiment goes well, that they might be looked at as, well, why didn't you think of that?
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. How about somebody from group 2?
Erin, Chef Diane, Jennifer, and Marianne.
So this is Marianne. I can report out. So it's funny, we had the first thing on our list was to be willing to give up control. That was the thing that Hannah first mentioned.
Yep.
And trusting others. People questioning and being patient. That was hard for some, especially me. I'm not always the most patient person to wait out an experiment. Wanting resolution now. Like technical versus adaptive work.
Okay.
Stepping out of comfort zone and then being challenged.
So tell me more about the questioning and the being challenged. Like when you say questioning, are you saying questioning the status quo or?
Yes, so questioning, and if someone brings up the need for an experiment or someone that feels like they're an expert in that area or already has good knowledge, and then someone challenging that and wanting to do an experiment surrounding that issue or topic.
Okay. Yeah, that's very fair. Very fair. Okay, thank you. How about somebody from group 3?
Deidre, I saw you come off mute. It was your group, Ashley, Donna, Esther, and Scott.
I didn't know I came off mute.
5 minutes is not enough time, people.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Deidre got cut off. So we talked about power and control, giving up power and control and being okay with that, being okay with not having all the answers. Esther and Scott talked about how half the team might really embrace it and the other half team might just complain about it. And so I guess that would be being vulnerable. Like, I don't know. Well, I don't know what the vulnerability is there necessarily. Like, I guess dealing with people who are disgruntled or something. Esther, you can speak up.
I was just saying, like, kind of feeling like, don't know if I'd be able to handle all of that tension in my team on top of everything else that we already have to do.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, thanks for sharing, Ashley. Next slide, Krista. So I think probably most of your vulnerabilities were similar in all of the rooms, and for the sake of time, we'll keep cruising here. And this is just a question I want you to think about. You know what irks you, you know what makes you irritable. What are some risks that you're willing to take in order to make sure that this idea of leadership among your staff can happen? And then what are some risks that you're unwilling to take? So we've talked before about, our accreditation and our licensing and those kinds of, policies. We aren't going to violate those things. So that's an obvious risk that we wouldn't take. Can you think of another risk that you might not be willing to take? Is anyone willing to share one? One or two voices on this. I like that there's some hesitancy, because if we're talking about policies, accreditation, licensing as our big ones, that means that maybe we're more willing to go ahead and take some risks for experimentation. And that's the whole purpose. That's the big why of this, right? Is to drive leadership deeper into the organization and in your teams, letting it be okay for this idea of leadership to happen. Okay, Krista, next slide. We're going to go into breakout rooms again. So you've talked a little bit about your vulnerabilities. We started thinking about the risks that you're willing to take. What I'd like you to do is spend another 5 minutes and talk about what needs to happen for you to get you super excited about moving this idea of leadership forward in your teams. Like, what do you need to do? Because you're the one that's going to energize others, right? Okay, so we're going to go in for only 5 minutes, Ashley, and have another really robust conversation. Have fun. Okay, really quickly, I'd like to hear from group 4 and group 5. So somebody from group 4, what needs to happen with some of you to get you fully energized about this?
Chrissy, that was your room. Chrissy, John, Keisha, and Lisa.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of said, getting out of the way, giving staff time to come up with it, because sometimes, we have a plan in mind and options in mind, but we want to grow our staff, so we need to be able to kind of get out of the way sometimes. So I feel energized by the outcomes of what can happen and there's excitement, but we also talked about in the room that sometimes we got to refocus because we could have too many projects all at once and they could be overwhelming. So some of that excitement is being that kind of measure of where we're at in the process.
Absolutely, yes. And competing values of the excitement of your staff versus keeping things manageable with the authority too. Someone from group 5.
I don't know if anybody wants to go. So we talked about, like, we're all kind of experiencing our programs joining within DECA, and how, at first you kind of want to know why that's happening. And what we've seen is just really good explanation about, we're all doing the work of DECA. We have the same goals often, and we have the same outcomes. I know for Family Pres and CPA, when that was combined, you know, we were doing a lot of the looking for the same resources for school supplies and diapers. And so being able to combine those resources has been really good, because the ultimate goal is the safety of kids and supporting families. And so it was brought up, you know, a lot in the other programs, the staff are already doing the work. And so they're adjusting to being programs joined, but everybody's doing good work. So you guys have anything to add? I summarized it okay?
I would just say that that graphic there on the slide is Tennille and I currently, and I'm the rabbit, I guess, and Tennille can be the front person. That's us running from Chrissy's office.
But you make a really good point, Teresa, that understanding the why and understanding efficiencies helps motivate us and gets us excited about doing that, whatever that next thing is. Really good. How about one more breakout room? Who wants to share? Group 1.
Okay, that was us. One thing that we talked about was we would feel energized if staff were taking the acts of leadership and moving forward by coming to us with their experiments to try.
Okay.
As opposed to coming to us to say, how do you want to do this? What do you want to do about this?
Yeah.
You know, coming to us with that, and then we can give kind of the parameters or the things to think about as they do this experiment.
Very, very good point. And sometimes that's just us training our staff to come to us with possible solutions as opposed to just a laundry list of problems. Very good point. Okay, real quickly, next slide, just for you to continue thinking about what experiments might you consider with your team. And this may be you having to put that out there in terms of training our staff to start thinking about experiments, because that's not just normal for folks, right? We're still trying to instill this idea of leadership. So, and be mindful of when you are doing these experiments, how you'll know if you're making progress. Thank you all for your discussion. I'm going to hand it over to Sandra just really, really quickly.
Thanks, Kelly. Share her gratefulness for you guys joining us today. Thanks to Trenton for bringing us this information and the idea about facilitating this conversation with supervisors. I want to leave you with one more quote. So Krista, if you could. So again, this is from Mind Tools. If you haven't been out there, go check them out. And I've been thinking about this quote as it relates to DECA. So the quote starts with Gandhi and Alexander the Great helped change the world because they lived by example. I don't know that our vision is to change the world, but you know, our value is to improve lives, person by person, family by family, community by community. And if we live by example as supervisors, if we are willing to experiment and fail and talk about failure with our teams, if we're willing to be vulnerable, speak to our loss and our triggers, if we're willing to do things out of the box and not as they've always done, our teams are more likely to do that too. And it's not really about achieving our goals as supervisors, if you look at the last part of this quote, but if we're willing to do that and be great role models and live by that example, they're going to help us achieve our collective goal of improving lives in the organization. So again, thank you all for your time today. Thanks, Krista, for navigating us through this 2 weeks in a row. You will be getting a copy of these slides. I'd encourage you, if you have not been out on the KLC site, that you look up Kansas Leadership Center and connect with those folks who can sign you up for your Leadership Edge. With that, y'all have a great rest of the afternoon. Weekend's coming, so have a great weekend.